Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 242 of the Juicebox Podcast. Today's show is sponsored by Omnipod, Dexcom, and Dancing for Diabetes. You can find out more at dexcom.com/juicebox, dancing4diabetes.com, and myomnipod.com/juicebox. About 200 episodes ago, Sam Fuld came on the program for the first time. He and I had a conversation that I quite enjoyed, and we kept in touch a little bit afterwards. I've been saying to Sam for like a year, I want to have you back on the show, and I'm looking for the exact right situation to have you back. And then things sort of fell into place. So I hear a lot from women who wish their husbands would listen to the podcast, but they find it hard to talk them into listening to a type 1 diabetes podcast. Then one day, just recently, I was thinking about something for my son in baseball, and as we were kind of thinking it through, I saw the parallels between the baseball thought and the way we manage type 1 diabetes. And then I started looking at a lot of the things that I say on this podcast and started seeing a lot of connections between baseball and this, and I thought, maybe this is how guys might be introduced to the idea of, bumping and nudging and being bold and that sort of stuff. So this one is going to be great for everybody. Don't get me wrong. It's not so baseball heavy that you'll be like, oh, I don't like baseball. But if you've got a husband or a boyfriend or something like that who likes the baseball, I think I figured out how to get them to listen. Please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise, and to always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. I don't know how much time you have or if you need to be free when the game starts or anything like that, but I had this kind of weird moment. I was talking to my son about ball. He's home from school and he starts up college ball, and first 3 games are rough. And we're talking about, hitting, and he hasn't played in a little while. Yeah. And his dad next to me starts saying, he starts with his baseball isms, right? He's like, oh, he's finding his swing. And I was like, his swing looks good to me. And so the guy keeps watching. He says, he's landing his foot late. I'm like, his foot's down in time. I'm like, I said, everything's fire. And it's like, he just kind of, his body's not doing what his brain is telling it to do. I don't know another way to say it at the moment, right? Sure. So I'm fighting through this guy's baseball isms. And we're talking, and my son and I are talking on the ride home. And you would love to talk about baseball with him, more than me, I imagine, because he thinks about it, I imagine, the way you do. He plays defense the way you played it, and he thinks about baseball a lot about like what your job is, which is what I want to talk about today. It's kind of how your job in baseball and diabetes, I see these amazing connections to. Just a brief reminder to check out dancingfordiabetes.com. It's dancing4diabetes.com. They're on Facebook and Instagram. After you check out Dancing for Diabetes, you're going to hear Sam talk later about his baseball camp. If you want to learn more about that, it's Sam Fuld, T1Dsportscamp.org. Sam's next camp is coming up in February on the 8th and 9th. It's in Tampa at the USF campus for ages 8 to 17, and Sam is there running the baseball sessions at the camp. More information on that at the end of the show. So there we are. We're talking. He's like, that's not the problem. It'll be all right. I just have to keep doing this, and I'll find it. Sunday, he crushes a ball. It's one step from going over the fence. And he's like, okay, I'm good. And that's it. You can't explain it. It makes no sense or anything like that. But if he got caught in those isms, then he would have spiraled out of control, because they don't mean anything. They're just things people say about baseball, things they say about things they can't quantify, I always think, right? And so you understand where they came from. Like, I've been in Philly my whole life. I watched Charlie Manuel coach, and he's an old guy sitting there going, it's time to take him out. I saw his elbow drop. Like something like that. Like the way that baseball had to have been done in the past, because no video replay. You're going off of this split-second interpretation you're having of baseball, and the baseball minds who can see it real quick are the ones who get to make the decisions. Right. So anyway, this dad's standing in the stands. He's saying all this stuff. 3 days later, Cole crushes a ball, and he looks at me and he goes, "He found it." And I was like, Man, he had it the whole time. Like, I don't know why you don't understand, right? So
told you he had his foot down now, finally, and
if you told Cole his foot,
the hitch in his swing and all this, right?
As if, and you look back at the video, you can look at 5 at-bats in a row. They look exactly the same, except in the last one he hit the ball. And so, right? So if you were to go to Cole and tell him, hey, this guy said you didn't have your foot down in time, he'd be murderous. He would be like, this guy doesn't understand what he's talking about. That's not what this is. Like, he would never want that. And so I know you don't probably listen to the podcast much, but we just did, Jenny Smith and I, she's a CDE who has type 1, and we did this series we called Diabetes Pro Tips, where we broke down all the ideas that we talk about on the podcast and put them into real, like, kind of digestible bits. And as I was doing that and having these conversations with Cole and thinking about having you back on the podcast, I realized how much the things we talk about diabetes mimic your job. And I don't mean like as a baseball manager. I mean like your job specifically. Are you still the only guy in the league who has this job?
As far as I know, at least I'm the only one who has this title.
The title.
Maybe that says more about title than anything. Like, it's not the sexiest title out there.
You are, hold on a second. You are the Philadelphia Phillies Major League Player Information Coordinator?
Yes.
How's that look on a business card?
There's not enough room on that. However long the average business card is, it does not contain, unless you want to go size negative font. Yeah, but I think it's still like the responsibilities are still fairly unique to the game. Yeah. I think there are more and more teams that are kind of picking up on it, and maybe they're titled differently. Maybe there's a lot of like quality control coaches out there. I shouldn't say a lot, but there are a number of them. And I think part of those duties might entail similar things to what I do. But as far as I know, player information is we have a monopoly on.
So if I were to oversimplify your job, it's that you can talk to a baseball player like a baseball player and understand the analytics like a guy with a Stanford economics degree. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's kind of perfectly put. Okay. Yeah, I'm sort of a bridge or a translator, really.
Okay. Yeah, more so. I would say a translator even more so than a bridge. Right?
Yeah.
We talk about on the podcast a lot that you have to trust that what you know is going to happen is going to happen. And that idea sort of just means you can't have some food and think, oh, maybe I won't need insulin for it this time, right? Like you have to trust that that's going to happen. Now, Sometimes you'll give yourself insulin for something and you didn't need it. But I maintain that you need to take the insulin every time, fight with the low once in a while when it happens, to avoid this battle with these high blood sugars constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't, to me, mimic the idea of, I don't know, taking a guy out, one batter into the 7th inning because statistically he just can't make it through the second batter in the 7th inning, I don't know what does, right? Because you're trusting blindly something that appears to be going okay, but you're fairly confident it's going to fall apart in a second. I need you to tell me what that's like a little bit, because I want this episode to serve as a bridge for dads and guys who tell me that they love the podcast, but they wish it was a little more masculine. That's what this episode's going to be, okay?
All right.
So tell me a little bit about that idea.
I'm going to have my beer first and turn off the football game. And yeah. I think that's an interesting point. Like, so you've got Aaron Nola out there. It's the bottom of the 8th. He's done nothing but steal the entire game. He's hitting his spots. All his stuff is there, and he's in his pitch counts getting up. Let's say he's at 105. And let's say all of our evidence for both him and for the league is that as your pitch count approaches 105, 110, say that your results start to suffer, despite looking really good leading up to that. Let's just say that that's the case. And there's some pretty significant research that shows that, in addition to a lot of research showing that, the third time through the order,
guys see
it better. Batters just generally have a lot better results third time through order than, say, first time through order.
Okay.
So let's just say that's the case. And I guess you could kind of make the analogy that, like, your blood sugar right now is 105. Let's say you've got a G6, like I have a Dexcom G6. And we all know that there's a bit of a lag there. But let's just say that even right now, despite the lag, you're 105. We'll make it extra complicated because your blood sugar is 105 and Aaron Nola's pitch count is 105.
Sam only knows a couple of numbers.
Yeah. But let's say that you just had a meal, right? Like, I guess that would be the analogy and let's not even call it a meal. Let's just say that you had a granola bar and it's got 28 grams of carbs in it. And history has shown that when you have 28 grams of carbs, your blood sugar will go up. Now, there might, like you said, there might be some instances where, I don't know, you've done enough exercise recently, or you haven't eaten barely anything at all, and you're just preventing a low by eating that, an oncoming low by eating that granola bar. Mm-hmm. But more often than not, history has shown that when you have 28 grams of carbohydrates, the blood sugar is going to go up. And that would be the analogy. You leave Aaron Nola in the 8th inning, and you get him up to 115, 120, 125, and he's starting to see guys either the third or fourth time around. That would be why you would lean on history and evidence. You would yank him before things get out of hand.
And those carbs can get on you before you know it, just like you can go from 105 to 120 pitches in just one at bat with a guy fighting you off. And now you don't have somebody warm. You're behind, right? He's still out there thinking, I got this, because he's a competitor. You want to think that your blood sugar is going to do what you think it's going to do. It's just, it's two parts. So if I wrote this down because I want to say this exactly right. If I said to you, this takes practice and repetition, it's going to require failure so that you can accumulate enough data to make sense of your outcomes. Then and only then can you find balance. Am I talking about baseball or diabetes? Right?
Yeah, it's absolutely the both.
It's exactly the both. And so I don't want to get you in trouble because a lot of people listen to this, but I'm baffled when I see people get the benefit of data, let's say in diabetes, and we can assume maybe in other walks of life, and they're so attached to how they feel before, they can't even give themselves over to the idea that maybe this data is valuable. And let me bring this into your world sometimes. If you turn on sports talk radio right now, you guys are in it. You look amazing. You're 1,000 times better than you were last year. You were in first place up until a couple of days ago. You've got the wild card locked right now. It's not even the All-Star break yet. And if you listen to some people talk about it, it's a disaster because it's not baseball the way they're accustomed to seeing it. And I don't know if you have any feelings about that you can share, but if you do, I'd love them.
I understand it. I'm obviously I am biased and I am particularly interested in the data side of the game. So I think disliking the current state of the game because there's just more data involved. I can appreciate. I don't agree with it. I think you can, sort of pick and choose the way you consume the game. And I think there's plenty of sort of traditional broadcasting available that still allows you to enjoy a game, consume a game in the way that you would have 30 years ago.
Right.
If you watch a game with, say Baseball Savant up on your computer and Fangraphs up on your computer, then you're kind of consuming it in a more data oriented way. And you've got the ability to do that and sort of quench your data thirst if you might have that. So I think there's just a lot of different ways that you can consume a game these days. So while I can understand people being averse to just seeing numbers that are foreign, and I think I don't know, numbers are tricky. In a lot of ways you kind of get it or you don't. You like numbers or you don't. And if you don't like numbers, I can understand where you just sort of want to turn a blind eye to it. And I totally respect that.
Yeah.
And one thing that I think I do particularly relate to is the sort of state of the game or the way the game is played now. I can totally relate to it being a little bit on the boring side in that you've got this the game has trended towards the 3 true outcome, the walk, the strikeout, or the home run, being if you look at numbers on the whole, the game is those 3 true outcomes are spiking, right? 20 years ago, I don't know what the numbers exactly were, but let's say that 35% of outcomes were either strikeout, walk, or home run. Mm-hmm. And now it's up in the mid 40s or high 40s. So it's it's becoming a little bit, you've got deeper counts, you've got less action, you've got, fewer balls in play. So I can understand where that's like a little bit less exciting to consume baseball.
Yeah. It's funny because I obviously grew up that way and I don't have your math background. So I have that feeling sometimes like, oh my God, it's not fair. The guy got that ball through the gap. The shortstop should not be in shallow right field. And he, the batter won and yet he lost, right? And at the same time, because of my son and the way he thinks about baseball, I've gotten to think about it a different way. Cole would tell you, I'd rather strike out with my swing than hit the ball with that guy's swing. Because my swing's going to create this, and this when it works. And he's just going to ground out to the shortstop. Yep. And so, and it's, at first I thought, when he started talking to me about this, I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I think hit the ball, right? And he's like, no. He goes, when I hit the ball, it goes in gaps. It drives, it climbs, it goes. He's like, those are doubles and triples. He goes, I get more bases. He talks about like baseball in terms of like accumulating bases, and he's like, and if I walk, it's great, I'll steal. He's like, and I have more bases, and he'll point to a guy and say, like, that kid hit the ball more than me today. I was more valuable to the game. And I'm like, wow, that's incredible. And it's funny because I had always thought about it on the defensive side that way, but my brain never took it to offense. I always used to tell him when he was younger, he used to be a little undersized. And I would always tell him, look, you'll always hang on with your defense. Like, no one in their right mind is going to take you out of the game. And so you have time to bring the rest of it around, which actually ended up working out for him. But he's a kid who I used to have to explain. He never watched hockey. I had to tell him about plus minus in hockey so that he could understand that his presence in center field saved 3 runs today, even though he didn't score any. That guy knocked in 3 runs. His error let in 3 runs. He's even, you're ahead. And I don't think I would have begun to think about baseball like that if I hadn't gotten to watch him play baseball that way. I think I'd be the guy yelling at the screen, like, hey, bum's not hitting. Like, Harper's astonishing to me. Like, the man is, like, talk about a baseball-ism. You hear people say the ball sounds different coming off his bat. It legit does, right? Oh, yeah. But the guy doesn't get a hit for 2 games, and the world's like, he's in a slump. I'm like, he's not in a slump. He just needs 3 more at-bats, my friend. And so I used to probably be one of those people who would look and think, guy hasn't had a hit in 2 games. What a disaster. And now I just realize they're all going to come in a wash at some point. Yeah. And the goal's not perfection. The goal's to reach the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think the goal, if you just look at it as an individual's like overall value, it's just been way easier to quantify and record offensive value, right? And it still is. But I think looking at it from a plus minus standpoint makes a lot of sense, right? And I think we're getting better and better at quantifying, at least like at the professional level, we're getting better and better at quantifying the value that somebody might bring on the defensive side or on the bases. Mm-hmm. You're right. Like, it doesn't really matter how you derive value. You could be some freak show, the best center fielder that's ever played the baseball game, and hit 200 with a 250 on base and a 300 slug, and you might still be better than the guy who hits 300 with a 400 slug if that guy can't play defense a lick, right? So it doesn't really matter how you see the value. It's just that it's a bottom line game. It's how many runs over the course of a season are you providing, and whether that's saving them on the defensive end, providing them with your legs on the bases, or with your bat.
And so to kind of tie that together with diabetes, before my daughter had a glucose monitor, I'd put her to bed at like this 180 blood sugar, and she'd wake up at 90. And people who listen have heard me say this before, and I thought I was a genius. Like, I had worked the whole thing out. Then we put a glucose monitor on and found out I was putting her to bed at 180. She was dropping to 50, staying there for hours. Her liver was probably dumping, glucose, and then she jumps back up to 90. It didn't matter how it looked. It mattered what it was. And that reminds me of, when you've got a guy in a corner outfield position who really can't go more than about 8 or 9 steps from where he's standing, but sometimes he does it, dives, majestically somehow doesn't drop the ball, and 60,000 people stand up. They're like, that's amazing catch. I'm like, that's not an amazing catch. He should have been waiting for it, sipping tea. Like right there, he shouldn't be diving for it, but it's what it looks like. And so they judge it on what it looks like. I see it with my son all the time, but I don't want to make it about him. I'll use an example from last year. Dexter Fowler went on a run last year that was insane. And the ball went off the tip of his glove. And all day the news was Dexter Fowler stinks. And I was like, he's the only guy going to be within 10 steps of that ball. Like, how are you going to look at it that way?
That's right.
But it's fascinating that's how we're so, like, what's in front of our face oriented. Like we see what we see. We don't see how what happened prior is affecting right now. And
yeah.
I was talking to, I don't want to say her name, but a girl who is in her mid-20s, and she's had diabetes for 20 years. And she asked me for help. And so I looked at her basal rates, and I was like, hey, your basal rates aren't high enough in a lot of places. She goes, no, I get low all the time. And I'm like, it's not because of your basal. But it's not what she saw. So I explained it all to her. We pushed her basal up across 24 hours, which scared the heck out of her. And her blood sugars got better, and she stopped getting low because she was getting high because her basal was too low. Then she was bolusing with no food in her stomach, causing a low. And she didn't see that the low basals were causing the high that was eventually resulting in the low. And I don't know, like, there's just something.
Yeah. I mean, I think like, we'll keep the diabetes and baseball analogies going. We'll call, like, StatCast, which is this radar technology and camera vision technology that gives us, like, was installed in every major league ballpark 4 years. It gives us an incredible amount of information. Now it's not just about what the ball does, but it's what it tracks movement of every fielder too, every base runner. So now, you might make the analogy that, like, StatCast is what a Dexcom is. So before we had to just sort of assume that when the center fielder ran into the gap and made a diving catch, that was a great play. We were able to see how much ground he covered exactly, how much hang time the ball had, right? How efficient his route was. Yeah. We didn't have any of that information. It's kind of like going to bed at 150 and waking up at 120, and you go, well, I guess it was like this sort of linear path there, it just stayed steady. But now we know I know with my G6, and I'm fairly new to it. I've only had it for under a year now.
Yeah,
it's sort of enlightening, like. StatCast era has been enlightening for baseball. It's like, I was actually, I was up at 200 at 2 a.m. and then it was a crash down to 80 at 4 a.m. and then maybe my liver was secreting glucose, get me back up to 120. Now we can do the same thing. Maybe we see this guy's route efficiency was like 88%, which is not good. And the only reason he made that diving catch was because he made a route like Magellan. And it was and it was not actually that sweet.
Zigzag run to the ball. Yeah. Listen, I'll tell you right off the bat. Some of your catches from your career are astonishing, but I don't think you count yourself as an incredibly fast runner, right?
Yeah, that's right. And that's another thing. Like I think I moved my legs quickly, and I was little, and I wasn't. Yeah, I would say I was probably like a slightly above average runner compared to, like, your average major league outfielder, but certainly not a burner. Like a lot of people may have assumed I was just because they looked like I was going fast. But I think I would have been. I think I provided my defense other ways, like jumps and route efficiency and just having instincts.
Yeah, I think you and I talked about this the first time you were on years ago. But if you see my kid catch a baseball, I've had people turn to me and goes, "What's he running, like a 6.5, 60?" I was like, "Oh God, no." I was like, but really watch him. He's moving before the guy swings the bat. Like, he's seeing more about this than you're thinking about. And so he makes it look easy. And he looks like he's flying because he's there so much sooner than the ball sometimes, and it's interesting. But if you get there too soon, then all of the, I don't know, like I don't mean the respect maybe you should get out of that just doesn't happen from a lot of people. Right. They're like, it's amazing to watch, A
lot of the best outfielders out there just almost never have to leave their feet because they put themselves in the right position. They get great jumps. They're catching the ball on the run, but not having to leave their feet because of either how fast they are, how good their routes are, how good their jumps are.
How did you talk yourself into not being afraid to dive for balls? And I don't mean the collision with the ground. I mean the idea that if you miss it, it gets past you. Like, was that like I'm going to just go for it feeling, and you found like a vibe, or that's interesting to me.
Yeah. I think I just had I had confidence from the very beginning. And I don't know where I got that confidence. I think it was sort of like this lack of fear and almost recklessness. And maybe I just trusted that net, my aggressiveness was going to be a positive. Mm-hmm. And the sort of the missed balls where you have to do the run of shame back to the wall.
And then show off that your arm's not great.
Yeah. Especially when you're picking it up at a standstill and just flinging it in, cut off, and hoping the shortstops run about 100 feet out there to help you. Those were like inevitable, and you just kind of had to come to grips with that. And you can't be afraid to make mistakes in baseball. Like you talk about with Cole, like you can't be afraid to swing and miss, and you have to trust that your swing in the long run is going to be what's best for you. And I think the same goes for defensive play, that by being aggressive and leaving your feet, as long as you don't do it like completely asininely, like you're going to ultimately provide a lot more value by being aggressive than if you play things conservatively.
Let's take a second, everyone. Let's take a second to talk about Dexcom and Omnipod. We'll start with Dexcom. The G6 continuous glucose monitor will change the way you think about using insulin. The Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor will change the way you feel about a loved one with diabetes being away from you. The G6 will also change the relationship you have with your blood glucose meter. It is FDA approved for 0 finger stick treatment. Have you ever experienced anxiety not knowing what your blood sugar was and found yourself testing way too much? That doesn't exist with the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, because you can always see not just what your blood sugar is, but what direction it's moving and how quickly it's moving in that direction. We obviously lean very hard on the information coming back from Arden's Dexcom G6, and I think you could as well. Check out dexcom.com/juicebox now. All you have to do is fill in a little bit of information about yourself, and you will get the process started. From there, the sky's the limit. I'll tell you right now that our results are ours and yours may very well vary. Who talks like that? Anyway, but just today, I'm talking about a couple of hours ago, Arden had her endo appointment. Her A1C, with absolutely no diet restrictions, was 5.5. Dexcom.com/juicebox, or the links in your show notes, or juiceboxpodcast.com. Go to a browser, type in myomnipod.com/juicebox. After that, fill in your name and your address, and hit submit. When you do this, here's what's going to happen next. Right in your mailbox, an Omnipod will arrive. It's a free, no obligation demo unit. Meaning that you couldn't give yourself insulin with it. It's for demonstration purposes, so that you can try it on and see what you think. Now, there is no other insulin pump in the world that you can try on before you buy. The company will just send it to you so you can give it a whirl. Now, why can Omnipod do that? It's not because they're more generous than the other insulin pump companies, although I think they are. It's because their pump is tubeless. It's not connected to anything. So it's easy to send you out like a dummy pod, that you can try, a demonstration. You have to do this. I mean, have to is a strong word, but how could you not? It's free. There's no obligation. You'll get to wear it to see what you think. And then if you want to move forward, it's as easy as continuing on with the process. You have nothing to lose. This will take 45 seconds. myomnipod.com/juicebox. Check out the insulin pump that my daughter has been wearing since she is 4 years old. She'll turn 15 in just 2 weeks. Last thing before we go, please check out dancingfordiabetes.com. That's dancing, 4, diabetes.com.
You're going to ultimately provide a lot more value by being aggressive than if you play things conservatively.
Right. And so there's a difference between seeing a 300 blood sugar and just randomly dumping a bunch of insulin on it, hoping for the best and making aggressive decisions that are thoughtful. And so we talk about that here a lot. And I very much hate the term, that's just diabetes. I don't like it when people say, I got low or I got high, that's just diabetes. I'm always like, no, something happened. You may not see it, but
Right.
it's there and it exists. And if we figure out what that thing is, then this isn't going to happen as much. And that's how you can get away from the fear part. Like, so it's after doing this podcast for now, I don't even know how long, it's like 5 years. I believe that what stops people first is fear of insulin, right? Your fear of diving for the ball, having it bounce up, hit you in the face and roll past you or something like that, right? They're afraid of the insulin. I understand why, because there's so many unknowns, but I try to give them these kind of ideas, these tenets that will stop that from being such a problem and allow them to be aggressive in ways that are thoughtful. So I don't know. I see a lot of connection to that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's when you don't know a lot about something, you tend to be risk averse. And I think, we talk about that, a lot. The importance of strength training has really obviously evolved, not just within baseball, but of course in all of sports. And I think you could make the analogy there in strength training. Like, if you don't know really what's going to cause injury, then you tend to be really risk averse, and you don't do certain exercises that look scary, and you don't do certain exercises that have a lot of load, right? A lot of weight to it. So, but the more we know about it, like the more we know it's okay to lift heavy using the right technique and doing the right exercise and understanding that individual's body. So maybe you can deadlift 400 pounds in season, knowing that you're taking the necessary precautions and you have all the relevant information that leads you to believe that it's not going to lead to any injury, and instead it's going to lead to more lower body strength and a cleaner arm action and your delivery and all that. Yeah. And it'll be a net victory by lifting that way and that heavily. So I think the same thing goes for insulin. It's like, if taking 5 units of Novolog is scary, but if you know that that's sort of what's going to take, what it'll take to get from 330 back down to 100, then that's what you have to do.
You need to do it. So it's funny when my son came to me one day when he was, I don't know, like 14 years old, and he's like, I'm going to start long tossing because I want to get my arms stronger. And I was like, okay, sounds good to me. Now, Sam, we're looking at each other today. I'm not the dad that, I mean, seriously, look at me. We've met in person, right? Like, I'm not the guy you come to for baseball knowledge. You wouldn't think looking at me, but so it made sense to me what he said. But my first thought was, oh God, don't hurt yourself. Like, that's just what I thought initially. And now if you go watch him, he has this whole process that he goes to. Like, he puts us 10 yards apart and he starts doing something weird with his arm. And then eventually he's flipping his arm and sending me that. And he's got this process. He knows it by like the back of his hand. And a half an hour later, I'm at the back of an end zone on a football field with a bucket. And he's at the back of the end zone on the other side, throwing a ball to me, 320, 330 yards. And he didn't even start using his legs till he got to 90 yards. And it's because he went through this process over years. Like, it wasn't like I'll long toss today and my arm will get strong. It took him forever. And then once he had it, he taught himself how to control it in a game, which is a different animal, right? Like it's easy to toss a ball really hard, but can you do it when people are screaming, when a guy's running, like all that other stuff is happening. And so I wish people understood that things don't come easy, like all the time, like, right? Like, you don't just get to make a decision, I'm going to do something and it's going to pay me back right away. Something you do today may not pay you back in a way that you can see it for a very long time.
Yeah.
But I need people when they're listening to believe that insulin does what it does, right? That if your kid's going through puberty, I heard somebody the other day say, my daughter's in puberty, I just give up until this is over. And I'm like, no, like, you can't just give up for 4 years. Like, it's not that hard. And so I got them, personally, and I said, it's just more. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, diabetes is telling you it needs more from you. Give it to it. Like, meet the need, And so it's scary, but meet the need. I had, in the first month or two that Arden started getting her period, I'm sure she's thrilled when we talk about this in the podcast, but she ate a meal that I knew flat out was 11 units of insulin. that I gave her 20 units of insulin for. I mean, it was insane. She weighed 130 pounds. It was nuts. But it's what she needed that day in that scenario, and it worked, right?
Yeah.
I don't give her that insulin. What's her blood sugar going to be? 500 all day long?
Right.
You know?
Same thing. Yeah. I mean, same thing when I'm sick, right? If I had the flu this spring, and I just knew that I was going to almost have to double down my insulin dosage. And I'm pretty insulin sensitive, and I haven't taken more than, say, 6 units in one injection in 15 years. But I knew in the moment that because of my flu that I would just have to take more.
That's what it's going to be.
I remember taking like eight or 9 units and going, holy cow, like, is this right? But you trust it that diabetes demanded more out of me, and that's
just what you have to do in return.
You got to do it.
Instead of sitting around and watching. I watch people talk themselves out of the right thing to do so frequently. Sometimes it's depressing. Just the idea of, I say more insulin a lot. Like, I think I'm going to make it into a t-shirt, because somebody will come like, look at all this. And they start talking about all these. I'm like, none of this matters. I'm like, you don't have enough insulin. Like, just use more insulin. Yeah. And it's the simplest answer. It's very frequently correct. And it's the most difficult leap to make.
Yeah.
Because you're afraid. And I understand it. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, you're looking at a guy who, early on, I gave my daughter 2 different seizures. Being like, this is right. And, it was with a meter before CGM and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
But I just felt like I can't give up. Like, I know that these ideas make sense together.
Yeah. And I will say, it is difficult. Lows stink.
Yeah.
Those are not fun and they don't feel good. And so I think whether it's conscious or not, like, we would all, as type 1s, much rather be at 180 than at 60 in terms of how we feel in the moment, right? So it's human nature to sort of like optimize for the short term and go, I feel fine at 200, like let's do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be down at 60, or like I'm guilty of the same. I'm guilty of it myself, especially overnight. Like I value sleep, and I have 4 young kids, and if I have like a 6-hour block to sleep, you better believe I don't want to wake up at 3 a.m. with a low. I want to get every like minute that I can get. And so I understand like the aversity towards lows, because there's no other feeling in the world like it.
And you obviously have a perspective I don't have. You have diabetes. I'm managing someone that has. But it's interesting, in that moment, it means so much to you. We switched spots. You became the angry fan. And I became the guy like, trust the numbers. It'll be all right. And you're like, screw you, man. I need to sleep.
Right.
So it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think, feeling low might not equate to like feeling like a disgruntled baseball fan, but I guess you could stretch.
Still a way you don't want to feel, right?
Right.
That's amazing. Like, Arden's right now, I'm looking at Arden's blood sugar right now. She's got a half day from school. My son wanted to say hi to you, but I made him pick up Arden from school and take her to lunch instead. And so she's eating now, and I can see she's getting ready to eat, and like where she's putting her insulin in and everything. And it's like, the technology's crazy. It's made such a big difference. So you're not pumping, right?
Not pumping. No, I've stuck with my Lantus and Novolog program. And I tinkered around with a pump a handful of years ago while I was still playing, and I just didn't love it. And I mean, it was Tandem's first T-Slim. And I think it was more about just having like tubing on me. It just felt cumbersome, and it just didn't. I wasn't afraid. I mean, I wasn't ready to take that sort of like step outside my comfort zone and wear one while playing. So I just kind of put it on the back burner, and I just love. I'm comfortable with the Novolog and the Lantus right now, but I'm also eagerly awaiting like the closed loop system, and I think like that the move to that is probably pretty inevitable for me.
Yeah, I think when we're done talking, I'll tell you about something that I've seen that is pretty amazing. So I was thinking, I tell people all the time to kind of bump and nudge their blood sugars. It wouldn't be difficult for you. I'm sure you don't mind injecting, but when we see a 120 diagonal up, we stop the arrow. Like, we think of it as stop the arrow, like to bring it back. It's easier to use a small amount of insulin now to return a 120 to 90 than it is to get higher, and fight with it later. It's another reason why I would tell you, if you want to have like crazy success with your Dexcom, bump and nudge and move your high alarm down. The lower you move the high alarm, the more, positive things you're doing, instead of like, you don't hear the alarm and think, oh God, something went wrong. You hear the alarm and think, oh wow, I'm about to avoid a problem. Right. I actually have heard from people who said that they used to have alarm aversions until they started thinking about it the way we talk about in the podcast. And then they kind of like, oh, this is an opportunity to do something good instead of an opportunity to find out I screwed something up.
Right.
And so, and because there's randomness and there's variability, right? Like there's things that happen that you can't plan for them in a way that stops them from happening, but you can have a plan for what to do when they occur, I guess. And it's very cool to see. But I think of the bumping and the nudging almost like a field shift. It just, sort of like, look, if the guy always hits the ball here, why don't we just get ahead of it? Like, why don't we be there? And if he beats us, he beats us, but we put ourselves in the best position. And I want to ask you if you agree with me about this. So when infield shifts happen in Major League Baseball, people go out of their minds about it. Like you're breaking some sort of a rule that exists. But outfielders have been shifting forever, and no one ever complained about it one time. Am I right about that?
Yeah, I think it's like maybe less
drastic,
like less aggressive.
Okay.
I think like outfielders have always shaded, a handful of steps, maybe up to 10 steps in one direction or the other. But I think visually it's not as like jarring as seeing an entire left side of the infield open, right? So I think it's, yes, while it's existed for a long time, maybe something as kind of like crazy visually hasn't. And so I can understand why people go like, what? This is not baseball. Right. But I think as long as like the rule book states that you can position your players however you want, like how can you not do that? Yeah. Like the same thing, whatever, like the same thing. I like making the football analogy, and I'm not a football expert, but like if you've got an elite wide receiver that you're playing against, like why not double team him every time and leave the other side of the field to man-to-man coverage, right? Like you're essentially like changing defensive alignment based off of tendencies or based off of skill. In football, there's no rule that says you have to keep your DBs in the same spot at all times. Like, why wouldn't you do the same in baseball? Why is baseball any different? Right.
Say if you see a quarterback fold under a blitz situation, maybe you blitz the guy because that's what he does. So I can't wrap my head around it fully. I am going to keep trying because I'm fascinated by it. Like part of me thinks it's a generation of people. And it's funny too, because I'll argue the other way. Like I would never want you to take an umpire out of a game. Like I don't want a computer to call balls and strikes. To me, that would like ruin what baseball is. Isn't it funny? I see that way, but I don't see the fielding shift that way. So I guess everyone's got their attachment to some idea about what the game is.
And that's fine. And like I said earlier, I think I can appreciate all of it. I really can. I have my own personal opinions, but I can appreciate people who just want to see what they've seen. And that's kind of what baseball is, right? Like it's a traditional sport. Yeah. That's part of what makes it so awesome is that it's basically the same sport that was, we were playing in the late 19th century. And that's pretty cool. Like there's no other sport in America like that. And I think that certainly the traditionalism of baseball is something we should try to maintain, without creating
a game that nobody can watch,
limits and creating a boring game. I think like we should be willing to adapt, but also appreciate that baseball is popular in part because it's been around so long and because it's really cool. Yeah, it's really cool that a sport is sort of persisted for so long.
It's funny because as I say that, I think my son would say, let a computer call the balls and strikes, because if he calls something off the plate, now I'm out of my head thinking he's going to call it again. And now I'm swinging all over the place trying to cover the ump instead of the plate. And I'm, all right. So I see the other side of that too, I guess. Listen, there's this thing about baseball that I love more than anything. It's because it takes up the time it takes that you have to give yourself over to it. It's like the idea of putting your phone down, right? Like just put your phone down. You go to the game, you sit down. I love that somebody can say to me, even at my own kid's game, what inning is it? And I go, I have no idea, but I'm having a great time. Like, you know what I mean? Like we're here, we're relaxed, it's going well. Are they winning? I don't know, maybe. You know, like it feels like there's something about being there. And I guess if you don't appreciate the small thing, because I've said this a million times, if you don't appreciate the unseen things about baseball, even in its classic form, it would be easy not to love baseball. And so I think that if you look at how the world progresses and you look at how my son at 19 years old thinks about baseball, there will be a whole generation of people who are going to come up and talk about that it's great that Dexter Fowler only missed that ball by a step, and that he's going to tell his son that, and so on and so forth. And, you know, one day it'll just be this big tapestry of how we got to where we are, I guess.
Yeah. No, in a lot of ways, it's like soccer, and I happen to be a big soccer fan. I grew up playing and played through high school, and obviously, like, soccer gets knocked all the time because it's lack of goals scored, right? And my counter to that is that it's art. It's art. Just because one ball was put in the back of the net over the course of 90 minutes doesn't mean that every minute of that action wasn't interesting, because it is art form, but it takes a certain level of knowledge to appreciate that. And I think the same goes for baseball. Like, you might have a bunch of swings and misses and a bunch of walks and very little action in the field, but like maybe you're not picking up on the shortstop like leaning one way because he knew a breaking ball was coming to a left-handed hitter, right? Or maybe you're not appreciating the sequencing that a pitcher made when he went with a fastball at the belt and then followed that up with a 12-6 curveball down, right? Like, so you definitely have to understand sort of ins and outs and the nuances of the game to appreciate, say, a swing and miss heavy game. But that's why, like, I think, you know, that's what makes baseball really interesting.
And I think too, you need to know, you need to love the game enough to understand where the line is. Like the other day, and you might remember this, I don't remember, I think it was a college game, but some kid's throwing a no-hitter and a guy breaks it up by bunting, which to me seems incredibly wrong. And right, like, to me it feels like, look, he's beating you. If you can't stop him from beating you by swinging that bat, then he deserves to beat you, which also doesn't make any real sense, right? But
you have some interesting lines that you draw. It's like you're hard to predict. Man,
I swear to God, Cole goes, "Hey, did you see this no-hitter got broke up by a bunt?" And I was like, "What a son of a bitch!" I was like, "Who would do something like that?" Right? And Cole goes, "A guy who doesn't want to get no hit." And I was like, "Hey, you're making a point." So, but that strikes me like that.
I think if you bunt with a no, if the intent of the bunt is to win the baseball game, then I have no problem with it.
Right.
If the intent of the bunt is if it's 11-0 and all you're trying to do is break up the no hitter, then I think that's where I draw the line.
Yeah. See, it is interesting, right? Yeah. Just with a little more information, it becomes clear.
Yeah.
You can't. I just don't, like, you can't do that to the guy. He's out there killing himself for this, you know. And I have no affinity to pitchers at all. Like, my son doesn't pitch, you know, like, you know, there's some people who have like a real, like, their heartstrings are tied to it, but I don't know. I recognize that without good pitching, baseball becomes something else. It's not quite baseball anymore.
Yeah. What would your diabetes equivalent of the bunt be?
What would my diabetes equivalent of the bunt be? All right. So something's going great and somebody comes in and screws it up. Okay, I got it. All right. So I have this happen to me all the time. People listen to the podcast. They get their A1Cs to come down appreciably without crazy lows, right? And then they go to the doctor, and the doctor tells them they're wrong and starts admonishing them for it. And so this person's having this giant success that they deserve, and then someone comes in for reasons that don't make any sense to me and ruins it for them. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but you got to admit that in 20 seconds, it was pretty impressive. And so, and so that happens a lot, Sam. Like, people, I get notes constantly. I went to the doctor. I was super excited. You know, we got my son's A1C down to like 6.8. It was 8. I go in there, and immediately the guy assumes I'm doing something wrong and literally yells at me to stop. Like, you're killing him. And even when sometimes they hold up their Dexcom charts and go, no, look, the doctor is so lost in his own ideas of how you get an A1C that low. They can't even believe you've done it, even when they're shown it. It's pretty sad, actually.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah, it happens a lot.
My equivalent would be, and I got the advantage of at least 60 more seconds to think about it, but I'm thinking about, so in my camp that I do in Tampa, I get to spend a lot of time with parents. We hold part of the camp includes a parents seminar. And one of the things that comes up every year as a major source of stress and a major complaint is just coaches who are sort of unfamiliar with T1D and how they treat the kid. And I think so. My equivalent would be a kid who is out there. Let's say he's playing soccer and he's had a great, first half, playing his butt off, and he's got a minor low at halftime, and he's 75, and he quickly corrects Juicebox, whatever it may be, and he's ready to go. But that coach doesn't let him go out there for the second half because he's scared or whatever it is. He doesn't have enough knowledge of the disease to understand it, and takes the sort of risk-averse approach and keeps the kid on the bench, even though he's just played a really, really strong first half. But he's got to go sort of adjust and make a change.
Do you see any correlation between? So you played for a few major league teams, but you also played for Madden, who thinks about the game differently, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but did you play for Bob Melvin too?
Sure.
And Bob's daughter has type 1 diabetes.
Right.
So you play with people you played for people who don't think that way. They don't think that way about baseball, and they don't think that way about diabetes. Do you think that's randomness that happened, or do you think that because you said I saw an old interview with you, somebody didn't draft you because of your type 1, right?
Yeah. I tell the story a lot because it's like probably the only time where I got something tangible that was like, we didn't do this because of your T1D. Mm-hmm. And it was some Baltimore Orioles scout who told me in my senior year of college that I wasn't drafted as a junior. They didn't draft me because of concerns of my diabetes. So yeah. I don't know. I would think that like playing for Joe, who's a very smart, understanding, open-minded individual, and for playing for Bob, whose daughter's type 1, I think that's still coincidence. Like I don't think Bob was like, we need to acquire the type 1.
But I don't mean that. But do you think they didn't see the type 1 as an impediment because he had perspective on it?
Yes, no doubt about that.
Yeah,
no doubt about that. And ironically, Lou Piniella was my first manager with the Cubs, mm-hmm. and Lou was type 2 diabetic. So
you can argue this all you want, Sam, but the numbers say that you only play for people who understand diabetes or different ideas about baseball.
Oh boy, yeah. Who else did I have? I had Ron Gardenhire. Maybe he might have type 2 diabetes. I don't know.
Right. Well, Ron, if you don't, we're sorry. And you were in Minnesota for a hot second, right?
Right. That's when I had Gardy as my manager.
Right. And that also, it's interesting because after you, was Ben Rivera there after you?
I think before. He had just left. Yeah.
Okay. So you guys are similar players to some degree, right? So there's a type they know worked for them, and they were, okay, see, Sam, I know you better than you do at this point. Okay. So, I'm going to ask you a little baseball stuff here. I don't know how much you can say or not say, but here's some stuff I've been noticing. Has Scott Kingery taken a leap?
Giant one.
He has, right?
Giant leap, yes.
And is that just time in the simulator? Is it just the sentence, you gotta go, you gotta fail, you gotta see it so you can do it again so that you know? Is it just time, or is it maturity?
I think there's a lot going on. I mean, I think, what we saw from Scott last year we all knew was not the sort of true version of him. I think for the first time in his career, he was playing with expectations. He signed that big league deal, long-term big league deal before he had ever stepped foot in a major league ballpark.
Right.
And I think for the first time in his career, he was playing with pressure and a significant amount of it, right? So he's that undersized kid who's had to sort of overachieve. He wasn't recruited by his hometown college of Arizona State, and instead he had to, he was a recruited walk-on at University of Arizona.
Right.
And has always sort of played with a chip on his shoulder, and I can certainly relate to that. And I know what it's like to just, in a lot of ways, it's easy to play as an underdog. And all of a sudden last year, he was not an underdog anymore. And there were expectations. And so I think it was in part just dealing with that on a daily basis. And once he struggled at the beginning of last year, it was like he was trying to dig out of this hole that he just couldn't get out of. And this year, that seems to have gone away. I think just having the offseason to refresh and get his mind right really helped. And he's back to being who he is, which is this kind of almost cocky little grinder baseball player that we love. Yeah. We absolutely love to death.
I really enjoy watching him play. Let me ask you a question, because you just said a bunch of things that mean in baseball or in sports terms, he was pressing, right? So that's a real thing, but it's quantified by all of sort of those little other things that you just said. Like if I said define pressing to you, it's not that simple, right?
Sure. But there's a ton of things that can lead to pressing. But I think in Scott's, this is just my opinion, obviously, but in Scott's situation, it's a pretty obvious change in dynamics and change in environment, where you go from a kid who's trying to climb the ladder in the minor leagues, and all of a sudden you've been given this $24 million contract or whatever it may be.
Right.
That's a pretty significant life change, and that a lot comes with that.
Sure.
And that includes some expectations. So how does it manifest itself on the field? You're probably gripping the bat a little bit tighter. Your muscles are tenser. It's really, really subtle, but it's enough to just put yourself in a rut and not be who you are. So, and along the same lines, I do think he made some changes to his swing too. I don't think it was just a mental thing. I think he made some physical changes as well that have helped him. He struggled with velocity last year. He struggled with fastballs up in the zone. And he made some really good adjustments with his swing that has allowed him to get on top of the baseball and hit velocity.
It's so funny because when Cole, we started at the beginning, I said Cole was slightly behind things when he was, the rest of that was when he was hitting against older kids, because he's in this college, it's a collegiate league, and every once in a while this big, senior comes up who's, just trying to stay together for his D1 stuff. And Cole's this slightly behind. And he's like, at one point he says to me, "What do you see?" And I was like, he finds time with his bat, and he's got a leg lift, which is, I don't think, Cole sees his swing as something he's working on forever. My son plays baseball because he loves it, but he plays baseball to keep playing baseball. And he doesn't want to just succeed in college with a collegiate swing. He wants to, if he can't succeed with a swing that someone could look at one day and go, "Hey, that swing still works," then to him and the type A part of his brain, none of it matters. And so he's got his leg lift. So he starts talking about, should I bring my knees together instead of my knee up? And I was like, man, I just think your bat's I think you got one too many in there. And he completely disagrees with me and just admonishes me at the fence. And baseball has changed. I am now a guy who holds up an iPhone in front of a fence so he can scrub through a swing real quick, which helps him immensely. I know that people a couple of years ago used to think it was, I don't know what they thought, but they didn't like it. But I'll tell you, that kid wants to see himself hit and then he deletes it, but he needs to see it for a second.
Yeah.
So I noticed that he took one bounce out from his bat off his shoulder. But he doesn't notice he did it. So I don't say anything about it. We talked about it, and then he told me I don't know what I'm talking about. And then at some point he did it.
Yeah. That's called a father-son relationship. Him not letting you know that he agrees with you. Believe me, we get that with players too. Yeah. We get pushback from players. Maybe it's because of their surroundings. They don't want anyone else to know that they're actually listening to us, but sometimes I think they are, and they're just not, acknowledging it.
It's so funny. A couple weeks ago, he had a doubleheader, and he's like, "Oh my God, it's so hot out," which I don't know where we live anymore, but it gets incredibly hot and then cold, and then it rains for 6 days. But But it's incredibly hot out. And he joked, man, it's so hot today. I said, go into the dugout and say, guys, listen, instead of 2 7s, why don't we just play a 9 and somebody can take 2 wins? We'll get out of here. And he literally looked at me like I was an idiot. And then 2 weeks later, I overheard him tell my wife that he said that to somebody. I was like, oh, you like creep. He would and to your point, he would just never tell me that he thought it was amusing.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. Well, Sam, we're getting up on an hour. I really can't thank you enough for doing this. You're literally talking to me as the Phillies are about to take the field in about a half an hour. I am going to put this out right at the All-Star break because that's my favorite time of the season. Like I love the break. I don't know why, but I think it's a great time.
Me too. Believe me, that 3 or 4 day stretch feels like 3 or 4 weeks, and it's something we all look forward to in this industry. I can't get enough All-Star breaks.
Yeah, I just love the idea that it feels like it's a reset and you get to see who comes out like really sprinting for the end. Like that about watching baseball I really enjoy. Huge thanks to Sam Fuld for coming back on the show, and to Omnipod, Dexcom, and Dancing for Diabetes for continuing to be such great sponsors. If you want to check out Sam's baseball camps, you're looking for Sam Fuld, T1DSportsCamp.org. The next camp is February 8th and 9th in Tampa at the USF campus. Age ranges for the camp, 8 years old to 17 years old. Sam will be there at the baseball sessions, hanging out and running the camps. He's a great guy. He's been living with type 1 diabetes for, my God, since he was 10 years old. He understands. I hear from a lot of parents who are looking for professional athletes to show to their children. They can say, look, everything is possible. Look at this guy. He's blah, blah, blah in Major League Baseball. This guy does this in football. Sam's the right guy. He's smart. He's well educated. Understands his type 1. He's been living with it for a very long time. He has a great attitude about it. No better person to start with than Sam Fuld if you're looking for someone to show your kids as an example. And if you want to check out Omnipod, Dexcom, Dancing for Diabetes, or Sam's Camp, and you forgot all the links I told you over and over again, they're right there in your podcast player in the show notes or at juiceboxpodcast.com. Don't forget this Friday and every Friday, Defining Diabetes. Jenny Smith and I give you a couple of quick moments where we define a phrase or word that impacts your life with type 1. Sometimes you think you know what a word means, but until you hear Jenny explain it to you, you don't really understand. Defining Diabetes is every Friday on the Juicebox Podcast. Speaking of Jenny, she'll be back very soon with another episode of Diabetes Pro Tip. Huh? You guys love the Diabetes Pro Tips. I know you do. If you haven't found them yet, they begin at episode 210 of the podcast with an episode called Diabetes Pro Tip, Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. The feedback I get from you guys is astounding. They've been out long enough now that I'm hearing back from people whose A1Cs are falling because of the Pro Tip episodes. So if you want to say, A1, see you later, check out the Diabetes Pro Tip series, beginning at episode 210.